There comes a moment in life when everything begins to feel heavier, not because you are failing, but because you are being prepared. The chosen one never rises without first being pressed, stretched, and tested in ways that seem almost unbearable. Spiritual elevation is not a reward randomly handed out. It is a transformation earned through inner refinement, and refinement requires pressure. Before elevation, life begins to rearrange itself in strange and often painful ways. People leave without clear explanations, plans collapse at the last moment, and doors that once opened easily suddenly refuse to move. It feels like rejection, but it is actually redirection. The spiritual path demands that everything unstable within and around you be revealed. Illusions cannot survive where elevation is approaching. The first test often comes through isolation. You may notice that conversations feel shallow, environments feel suffocating, and even familiar faces feel distant. This loneliness is not punishment, it is separation from noise so you can finally hear your inner voice. When distractions fade, truth becomes louder, and truth is not always comfortable. Many try to escape this stage by returning to old habits, old relationships, or old identities, but the more you resist, the stronger the pressure becomes. The second test appears as emotional purification. Buried wounds rise to the surface without warning. Memories you thought were forgotten return with intensity. Regret, grief, anger, and fear all demand acknowledgement. This is the clearing of the inner foundation. Elevation cannot rest upon unresolved pain because unhealed wounds distort perception. The chosen one must learn to feel without being controlled by feeling. You are not breaking when emotions overwhelm you, you are releasing what you were never meant to carry forever. Another powerful test is confusion. Direction disappears. The future becomes unclear, and even your purpose feels hidden. This is one of the most misunderstood spiritual trials. People assume clarity is proof of progress, but before true clarity comes, false certainty must collapse. When you no longer know what to do, you are forced to develop trust beyond logic. This is where intuition begins to awaken. Not the voice of fear, not the voice of desire, but the quiet inner knowing that cannot be explained, only sensed. The chosen one learns to move without seeing the full path, step by step, guided by something deeper than reason. Then comes the test of detachment. Things you once valued lose their meaning. Achievements feel hollow, validation feels temporary, and even success fails to satisfy. This stage can feel frightening because identity begins to dissolve. Who are you without the roles you played, the approval you chased, the image you protected? Elevation requires authenticity, and authenticity cannot exist where identity is built on external approval. You are not losing yourself, you are losing what was never truly you. This stripping away continues until only what is real remains. Another test arrives through repeated challenges that seem unfair or relentless. Just when you believe you have endured enough, another obstacle appears. This is the strengthening of spiritual endurance. Elevation demands stability, and stability is not developed in comfort. The chosen one must become someone who does not collapse under pressure, someone who can remain centered even when life is unpredictable. Every repeated challenge is building resilience, sharpening awareness, and expanding capacity. Nothing is wasted, even when it feels excessive. The universe is not testing your limits to break you, but to show you that your limits were illusions. One of the most painful tests is misunderstanding. Others may misjudge your intentions, doubt your growth, or question your transformation. You may feel unseen, unheard, or even rejected for becoming who you truly are. This stage teaches inner validation. If your sense of worth depends on being understood by everyone, your foundation is fragile. The chosen one must stand in truth even when misunderstood. Silence becomes strength. You learn that not every truth needs defense, and not every judgment requires response. Elevation demands self-definition that is not controlled by external perception. Then comes the test of patience. Progress becomes invisible. Effort seems unrewarded. Time feels slow, almost frozen. You may wonder if anything is changing at all. But beneath the surface, deep restructuring is happening. Just as roots grow unseen before a tree rises, your inner world is stabilizing in ways you cannot measure yet. This phase teaches trust in process rather than attachment to immediate results. True transformation is rarely dramatic in the moment. It is gradual, silent, and profound. Another spiritual test before elevation is the confrontation with fear. Not ordinary fear, but the deep fear of stepping into your full potential. Many people say they want growth, but when growth demands courage, visibility, and responsibility, hesitation appears. Elevation is not just expansion of power, it is expansion of accountability. You must face the fear of being seen, the fear of failing publicly, the fear of carrying greater influence, and even the fear of leaving behind the familiar version of yourself. Growth requires courage not once, but continuously. The chosen one must learn to move forward while fear still exists, not waiting for fear to disappear. There is also the test of surrender. Control must be released, plans must loosen, outcomes must be allowed to unfold without constant interference. This is difficult because the human mind seeks certainty and control for safety, but spiritual elevation operates through alignment, not control. When you stop forcing and start allowing, life begins to move with a different rhythm. Synchronicities appear, guidance feels clear, opportunities emerge without struggle. Surrender is not passivity, it is cooperation with a higher flow that cannot be manipulated through force. One of the deepest tests is self-confrontation. You begin to see your own patterns clearly: avoidance, pride, insecurity, attachment, resistance. Nothing remains hidden. This level of self-awareness can feel uncomfortable because it removes excuses, but it also gives power. You cannot change what you refuse to see. Elevation requires radical honesty with oneself. No denial, no distortion, no self-deception, only truth. The chosen one learns to observe without judgment, correct without shame, and grow without resistance. Gratitude also becomes a test. Can you remain grateful even when circumstances are unclear? Can you appreciate lessons while still experiencing difficulty? Gratitude during ease is simple. Gratitude during uncertainty is transformation. It shifts perception from victimhood to growth, from resistance to acceptance. It opens awareness to meaning hidden within struggle. Before elevation, there is often a sense of being paused between worlds. You no longer belong to your past identity, but your future self has not fully emerged. This in-between space can feel uncomfortable, like standing on a bridge that seems endless. But this is the space where integration happens. Old energy releases while new energy stabilizes. It is not emptiness, it is preparation. Through all these tests, one truth becomes clear. Nothing happening to you is random. Every experience is refining awareness, strengthening resilience, and aligning you with a higher state of being. Elevation is not simply rising above difficulty, it is becoming someone who can hold greater clarity, compassion, strength, and responsibility. The chosen one is not chosen because life is easy, but because the soul is willing to transform deeply. When the tests finally begin to soften, something within feels different. Not louder, not dramatic, but steadier. Reactions slow down, awareness expands, peace appears without reason, and you realize that elevation was never a destination waiting outside you. It was a state emerging from within you, built through every challenge you survived, every illusion you released, every fear you faced, and every truth you accepted. The tests were not barriers. They were the path itself, and the one who walks through them is no longer the same person who entered. That is the real meaning of spiritual elevation. It is not rising above life, but rising into the fullest expression of who you were always meant to become. After the deepest tests have reshaped your inner world, something subtle begins to shift within you. It is not sudden, not explosive, and not always visible to others, but you can feel it in the way you respond to life. Situations that once drained you no longer carry the same weight. Reactions that once came instantly now pause, as if something inside you is observing before responding. This is the beginning of inner stabilization, the quiet phase where transformation settles into your being. The chosen one does not simply survive spiritual tests, they become someone entirely different because of them. What once triggered anxiety now invites awareness. What once felt like chaos now feels like movement with purpose. You begin to sense that every challenge you endured was shaping your perception, not just your endurance. One of the first changes that occurs after intense spiritual testing is the shift in perception of pain. Pain no longer feels like punishment. It becomes infinite, asking, why is this happening to me? You begin asking, what is this showing me? This single shift transforms everything. Struggle for it becomes direction. You stop resisting experiences and start listening to them. This does not mean you enjoy hardship, but you recognize that every emotional reaction carries a message about attachment, fear, expectation, or identity. The chosen one begins to read life like a language instead of reacting to it like an attack. Another powerful shift is the growing sense of inner authority. During the testing phase, confusion often dominated your mind. You search for answers everywhere through people, signs, validation, reassurance. But now something new emerges: self-trust. Not arrogance, not certainty about everything, but a grounded sense that you can navigate whatever arises. Decisions feel less forced. You no longer need constant confirmation from others. There is a quiet knowing guiding you, and even when you cannot explain it logically, you recognize its accuracy through experience. This inner authority is one of the clearest signs that elevation is approaching, because elevation requires independence of perception. You cannot step into higher awareness while constantly doubting your own insight. Relationships also begin to change in ways that may feel surprising. You become more sensitive to energy, intention, and authenticity. Conversations that once felt normal now feel draining if they lack sincerity. You notice patterns in people more quickly, patterns of manipulation, insecurity, projection, or avoidance. But instead of reacting with anger, you respond with clarity. Boundaries become natural, not forced. You no longer feel guilty for protecting your peace because you understand that your energy is no longer meant to be scattered everywhere. The chosen one begins to understand that not everyone can walk beside them in every phase of growth, and this realization brings acceptance rather than resistance. Another important transformation is emotional neutrality. This does not mean emotional numbness. It means emotional balance. You still feel deeply, but feelings no longer control your direction. Joy does not make you reckless, and pain does not make you collapse. You begin to move from a center that remains steady regardless of outer circumstances. This stability is what allows elevation to sustain itself. Without emotional grounding, higher awareness would become overwhelming. The tests you endured were not only removing illusions, they were strengthening your capacity to remain balanced in expanded awareness. As your inner world stabilizes, synchronicity becomes more noticeable. Life begins to feel coordinated in subtle ways. Encounters happen at meaningful moments. Ideas appear exactly when needed. Opportunities align with your readiness rather than your impatience. These experiences are not random coincidences, they are signs of alignment. When resistance decreases and awareness increases, you begin moving with life rather than against it. The chosen one starts recognizing that elevation is not about forcing reality to change, but about becoming so aligned that reality responds naturally. At this stage, silence becomes valuable in a new way. Earlier in your journey, silence may have felt lonely or empty. Now it feels full, alive, almost communicative. You begin to hear thoughts more clearly, sense emotions more precisely, and observe subtle internal movements that were once invisible. Silence becomes a space of integration where insight forms naturally. You no longer seek constant distraction because stillness now feels nourishing rather than uncomfortable. This deep comfort with inner silence is one of the most powerful signs that your consciousness is expanding. Purpose also begins to feel different. Before spiritual testing, purpose may have been tied to achievement, recognition, or direction. Now purpose feels more like alignment of being. It is less about what you do and more about how you exist. You begin to notice that your presence itself affects environments. Your calm influences tension. Your clarity influences confusion. Your awareness influences reactions. Without effort, your state of being begins to shape the atmosphere around you. This is the early expression of elevated energy, not performance but presence. Another profound shift is the release of urgency. During earlier phases of growth, there may have been intense desire to reach the next stage quickly, to understand everything immediately, to escape discomfort as fast as possible. But now patience feels natural. You understand that timing is part of transformation. You no longer rush the unfolding of life because you trust the intelligence guiding it. The chosen one learns that elevation cannot be forced, it can only be embodied gradually. Urgency dissolves into readiness. Your awareness of truth also sharpens. You begin to recognize subtle forms of illusion not only in others but within yourself. Self-deception becomes harder to maintain. You notice when you are acting from fear rather than authenticity, when you are seeking approval rather than alignment, when you are holding on to something that no longer resonates. This clarity is not harsh, it is liberating. Truth no longer feels threatening because you understand that seeing clearly is the only way to remain aligned with growth. Compassion deepens in unexpected ways. After facing your own shadows, wounds, and fears, you begin to see others with greater understanding. You recognize that most harmful behavior comes from unconscious pain rather than intentional malice. This does not mean you tolerate unhealthy behavior, but you no longer carry unnecessary resentment. Compassion becomes a natural extension of awareness. The chosen one learns to hold firm boundaries while maintaining an open heart. Another sign that elevation is nearing is the sense of energetic expansion. You may feel more sensitive to environments, more aware of subtle emotional atmospheres, more responsive to intuitive impressions. Your perception feels wider, as if you are sensing beyond surface appearances. This expanded awareness can feel overwhelming at times, but it also brings clarity. You begin to understand situations without needing explanations. Insight arrives instantly, without mental effort. This is the awakening of deeper perception that elevation requires. You also begin to notice that your relationship with uncertainty has transformed. Earlier, uncertainty created anxiety because it felt like loss of control. Now uncertainty feels like possibility. You understand that not knowing allows new paths to emerge. Instead of fearing the unknown, you become curious about it. The chosen one develops comfort with unfolding rather than prediction. Perhaps the most important change is the emergence of inner peace without external reason. Nothing dramatic needs to happen for you to feel calm. Peace appears quietly, steadily, like a background presence that remains even when challenges arise. This peace is not fragile because it is not dependent on circumstances. It is the result of alignment between your awareness, your truth, and your acceptance of life's movement. As all these shifts integrate, you begin to sense that something greater is approaching, not as an event, but as a state of being you are becoming ready to hold. Elevation is not descending from outside, it is rising from within, built layer by layer through every lesson you embodied. You realize that the tests did not simply prepare you to receive something new. They prepared you to become someone capable of sustaining expanded awareness, deeper perception, and greater responsibility. And in this quiet, steady transformation, you begin to understand something profound. Elevation is not a moment of arrival. It is the moment you realize you are no longer resisting who you are becoming. As this inner peace stabilizes, a deeper transformation begins that feels less like change and more like activation. It is as if something that was always present within you but dormant slowly begins to awaken. This stage is not loud or dramatic. It unfolds quietly, almost like a subtle shift in gravity inside your own consciousness. You start noticing that your thoughts carry more weight, your intentions feel more focused, and your awareness moves with a clarity that was never there before. It becomes harder to act against your inner truth and easier to move in alignment with what feels real. The chosen one does not simply grow stronger here, they become more precise, more intentional, more internally guided. At this point, life begins presenting you with situations that test not your endurance, but your embodiment. Earlier tests asked if you could survive pressure. Now the question becomes, can you live from what you have learned? Can you respond with wisdom instead of reaction? Can you remain grounded when old triggers appear again, not as punishment, but as final confirmations of your growth? Many notice that familiar emotional patterns briefly return during this phase. Old fears may surface, past doubts may whisper again, or familiar challenges may reappear in slightly different forms. But something is different now. The intensity is lower, and your response is steadier. You no longer feel consumed. You observe, understand, and choose consciously. These are not setbacks. They are integration points where your transformation becomes real through action. Another powerful experience during this phase is heightened awareness of alignment and misalignment. You begin to feel immediately when something is not right for you, not through overthinking, but through sensation. Your energy contracts around what is false and expands around what is true. Decisions become less mental and more intuitive. You may find yourself naturally stepping away from environments that drain you and moving toward spaces that nourish you, even if you cannot logically explain why. This sensitivity is not weakness, it is refinement. Elevation requires precision in where your attention, energy, and presence are directed. Your relationship with time also begins to shift. You may feel less rushed by the future and less attached to the past. Moments become fuller, more vivid, presence deepens. Instead of constantly anticipating what comes next, you begin experiencing what is now with unusual clarity. This expanded presence brings a surprising realization: much of the anxiety you once carried was created by mental projection, not actual experience. When awareness rests fully in the present, unnecessary tension dissolves naturally. The chosen one begins to live with greater immediacy, responding to life as it unfolds rather than resisting it with expectation. At the same time, your sense of responsibility deepens, not in a heavy or overwhelming way, but in a conscious recognition that your awareness influences more than just your personal experience. You begin to see how your emotional state affects others, how your words carry impact, how your presence shapes the atmosphere of a space. This awareness naturally encourages greater mindfulness. You speak more intentionally, you listen more deeply, you act with greater consideration. Elevation is not just expanded perception, it is expanded influence, and influence requires responsibility. Another profound shift during this stage is the release of internal conflict. Earlier in your journey, different parts of yourself may have felt divided, one part seeking growth, another resisting change, one part hopeful, another afraid. Now these internal tensions begin to harmonize. You feel more unified, more whole. Decisions feel less like internal battles and more like clear movements forward. This inner unity creates a powerful sense of stability. You no longer feel fragmented between who you were and who you are becoming. Integration replaces struggle. As this unity strengthens, creativity often awakens in unexpected ways. Ideas flow more freely, insights appear spontaneously. Solutions emerge without force. This creativity is not limited to artistic expression. It shows up in problem-solving, communication, and perception itself. You begin seeing possibilities where you once saw limitations. This is a natural result of expanded awareness. When the mind is no longer crowded by fear, resistance, and confusion, it becomes open to inspiration. There is also a noticeable shift in how you experience challenges. Difficult situations no longer feel like threats to your stability. Instead, they feel like opportunities to apply your awareness. Even when discomfort arises, it does not define your state of being. You respond rather than react. You adjust rather than collapse. The chosen one becomes adaptable, not because life is easier, but because their inner foundation is stronger. During this stage, many experience moments of profound clarity that feel almost timeless. Brief but powerful realizations about life, existence, connection, or purpose may appear suddenly, without mental effort. These insights often arrive in stillness, during quiet reflection, simple observation, or deep presence. They cannot be forced or predicted. They arise naturally when the mind becomes quiet enough to receive them. These moments do not always come with words, but they leave a lasting sense of understanding that reshapes perception permanently. Another transformation that occurs is the dissolution of comparison. Earlier in life, measuring yourself against others may have been automatic, comparing progress, success, recognition, or worth. Now that impulse fades. You begin to understand that every path unfolds uniquely. Your focus turns inward toward authenticity rather than competition. This release of comparison brings tremendous freedom. Energy once spent measuring is now available for growth, creation, and presence. Trust also deepens to a level that feels almost unshakable. Not blind trust, but experiential trust built from everything you have lived through. You have seen yourself endure confusion, pain, isolation, and uncertainty and still transform. Because of this, fear of the unknown loses much of its power. You know, through direct experience, that you can move through whatever arises. This trust becomes the foundation that supports elevation. You may also notice that silence between events feels meaningful rather than empty. Periods where nothing dramatic happens no longer create restlessness. You recognize these spaces as integration phases where awareness stabilizes and energy recalibrates. The chosen one learns that growth is rhythmic, expansion followed by stillness, movement followed by rest. Both are essential. At times, there may be a subtle sense of standing at the edge of something vast and undefined. Not fear, not anticipation exactly, but a quiet recognition that your awareness is expanding beyond familiar boundaries. You may feel both grounded and open, stable yet spacious. This threshold feeling often appears before major internal shifts. It is the sensation of nearing a new level of consciousness without fully stepping into it yet. Humility becomes deeper as well. The more you understand, the more you recognize how vast existence truly is. This awareness does not diminish you. It expands your sense of wonder. You become more open, more receptive, more willing to learn from every experience. The chosen one realizes that elevation is not about superiority, but about alignment with truth, and truth is infinite. Perhaps the most profound realization during this stage is that transformation is no longer something you are trying to achieve. It is something you are living. Growth is no longer an effort, it is your natural state of movement. Awareness expands not because you force it, but because resistance has diminished enough for expansion to occur naturally. And as all of this unfolds, one quiet understanding begins to settle within you. You are approaching the threshold where preparation ends and embodiment fully begins. Not because a signal announces it, not because the world suddenly changes, but because your inner state has reached the stability required to hold what comes next. You are no longer just being shaped by the journey. You are becoming the living expression of everything the journey has taught you. And then, almost without warning, the moment arrives when everything that once felt like preparation begins to express itself as reality. Not an external event that announces your elevation, but an internal shift so complete that you realize you are no longer becoming, you are being. The long season of testing, refining, releasing, and integrating settles into a quiet certainty. There is no dramatic transformation that the world can easily recognize. Instead, there is a profound steadiness within you that does not waver with circumstances. The chosen one does not step into elevation like entering a new place. They awaken to the fact that elevation has been forming within them all along, waiting for full embodiment. At this stage, your awareness moves differently through life. You are no longer searching for meaning in every experience because meaning reveals itself naturally. You no longer struggle to maintain balance because balance has become your default state. Situations that once demanded intense emotional effort now pass through your awareness with clarity and ease. This does not mean life becomes free of challenge. Challenges still appear, but they no longer shake your foundation. They move around you rather than through you. Your center remains intact. One of the clearest signs that elevation has stabilized is the absence of inner resistance. Earlier in your journey, growth required effort, discipline, and conscious redirection. Now alignment feels natural. You do not force yourself to respond with awareness. Awareness responds through you automatically. Your actions reflect your understanding without internal struggle. What once required practice has become instinct. This is the embodiment of transformation. Your relationship with fear changes completely. Fear may still arise as a signal of the unknown, but it no longer controls your movement. It appears, it is acknowledged, and it dissolves without dominating your perception. You understand that fear is not an enemy to fight, but an energy that loses power when met with clarity. Because of this, courage no longer feels like effort. It feels like a natural extension of your trust in life. Another profound shift is the deepening of presence into something almost luminous. You are fully where you are, not as a mental practice, but as a state of being. Each moment feels alive, textured, complete in itself. You notice subtleties that once escaped you, the emotional tone of a room, the unspoken meaning in a conversation, the quiet intelligence moving beneath ordinary events. Awareness becomes expansive yet grounded, wide yet precise. The chosen one begins to live with a kind of quiet alertness that perceives without strain. At this level, your energy becomes deeply coherent. There is no longer a gap between what you feel, what you think, and what you express. Your inner and outer worlds reflect each other with increasing harmony. This coherence creates a powerful sense of authenticity that others can feel even if they cannot explain it. You no longer try to influence people, yet your presence influences naturally. You no longer seek recognition, yet your clarity is noticed. This is not because you are trying to be different, but because alignment radiates in ways that cannot be hidden. Your sense of purpose also transforms into something much more expansive. It is no longer tied to specific outcomes or achievements. Instead, purpose becomes the quality through which you live every moment. How you listen, how you speak, how you respond, how you exist, these become expressions of purpose. You understand that elevation is not about doing extraordinary things, but about bringing extraordinary awareness into ordinary moments. Life itself becomes the field through which your consciousness expresses meaning. Compassion reaches a depth that feels almost boundless. You no longer separate people into categories of deserving or undeserving. You see the patterns of fear, pain, and conditioning that shape human behavior, and this understanding softens judgment without weakening discernment. You remain clear in your boundaries, but your heart remains open. The chosen one learns that strength and gentleness are not opposites, they are complementary forces that create balance. Another change that becomes unmistakable is your relationship with control. The need to manage every outcome fades completely. You act with intention, but you release attachment to results with ease. This creates a sense of flow that feels effortless yet deeply directed. Life begins unfolding in ways that feel synchronized with your readiness, not your impatience. You recognize that alignment produces movement far more effectively than force ever could. Silence deepens into something sacred. It is no longer simply the absence of noise. It is a space of living awareness where insight, clarity, and understanding arise spontaneously. You can remain in stillness without restlessness, without the urge to fill the space. This comfort with silence reflects a mind that is no longer seeking distraction from itself. Instead, it rests in its own depth. You also begin to experience a profound sense of interconnectedness. The boundary between self and world feels more fluid. You recognize patterns linking experiences, people, and events in ways that reveal an underlying unity. This awareness does not make you feel separate or superior. It makes you feel deeply connected, deeply responsible, and deeply present within the greater movement of existence. Gratitude becomes continuous, not because everything is easy, but because everything is meaningful. Even difficulty carries value. Even uncertainty carries possibility. You no longer divide life into favorable and unfavorable experiences. Everything becomes part of a larger unfolding that you trust completely. At this stage, identity becomes lighter. You no longer cling to rigid definitions of who you are. You move fluidly, adapting without losing your center. The chosen one understands that the self is not a fixed structure, but a living expression of awareness. This flexibility allows you to respond to life with creativity rather than habit. There is also a profound sense of completion mixed with continuous expansion. You feel whole as you are, yet open to endless growth. There is no urgency to become more, yet no resistance to evolving further. This paradox, completeness and expansion existing together, is one of the clearest indicators of true elevation. Moments of deep peace arise not as rare experiences, but as a constant background presence. Even when activity fills your day, even when challenges appear, this peace remains quietly beneath everything. It does not need protection. It does not need maintenance. It simply exists. And perhaps the most powerful realization of all is this: the journey was never about reaching a higher place. It was about removing everything that prevented you from recognizing the depth that already existed within you. Every test stripped away illusion. Every challenge revealed strength. Every loss created space. Every moment of confusion opened the door to deeper knowing. You understand now that elevation is not a reward given after suffering. It is the natural state that emerges when resistance dissolves, awareness stabilizes, and truth is fully embodied. The chosen one does not stand above life. They stand fully within it, awake, aligned, and present. And in that presence, nothing more is required.